10 of the world's deadliest snakes live in Australia. And so does the world's deadliest spider that can kill a horse, and a whole lot of other poisonous spiders, and a whole host of things that can kill you in the natural world. Which is why I was concerned when I was backpacking by myself for 4 days on a trail in southern Australia. And my concern was increasing because I kept seeing signs like this with death symbols on them. And so I took the first opportunity I could to ask 4 women Australian hikers what the situation was with the spiders and the snakes. And they said, oh, you're lucky because we don't have any poisonous spiders here. Yes. But, they said, if you see a snake, it is poisonous because that's all we have here. And I said, how am I supposed to stay safe because I am walking through waist-high grass today? And they said, you'll be fine. Just make sure you can see where each of your footsteps falls. You'll be fine. Sure. But when they found out that I was from the Pacific Northwest, all 4 of them said, we would never go backpacking there. I said, why? And they said, because you have bears. I said, you can see bears. Fear is universal. It may vary in its particularities, but we've all got fear. Unless you're one of the very few people in this world who has had the fear processing center in your brain damaged, you've got fear. And it's a good thing that we do, because fear has literally saved the butts of humanity for millennia. Fear is good. But we also know that fear can be limiting, and it can be damaging to others. Kids who have a fear of clowns, they often have to leave the party early. People who have a fear of germs, it can lead to antisocial behavior. The fear of poverty can lead to the hoarding of wealth. The fear of terrorism can often lead to war on innocent people. The fear of rejection means that isolated people become even more isolated. And the fear of failure means that a whole lot of interesting and important things are never tried or invented. So fear can dramatically shrink our lives, and it can impinge on other people. So what is fear? Fear is a physiological, emotional response to a real or perceived danger. And it's elicited in the brain. Scientists who study the brain say that there are 2 primary systems in the brain that deal with fear: the emotional brain and the rational brain. And the emotional brain is responsible for our well-being. It gives us basic information like, am I hot? Am I hungry? Am I tired? Am I experiencing pain? Am I experiencing pleasure? The emotional brain regulates our breathing for us too, so that we don't even have to think about it. And it contains the danger detection system. Now, the rational brain really starts to develop about age 2, and it gives us our cognitive abilities: how to learn a language, to have abstract thought, to predict consequences, and to reflect on ours and others' actions. Now, sensory information, our seeing, our hearing, our touch, our taste, our smell, all that information goes simultaneously into the emotional and the rational brain. But the emotional brain gets first dibs because it reacts faster. When the emotional brain receives a signal that it thinks there's something dangerous out there, it almost instantaneously triggers the release of stress hormones in our bodies, like adrenaline and cortisol. And it increases our heart rate and our blood pressure and our breathing, and it slows down our digestion so that there's more blood and oxygen available to our muscles so that we can fight, flee, freeze, all of that. It's a basic system that's been hardwired into most species of the animal kingdom, and it's a good thing that we have it. Now, fear is what we feel when our body is in this stress response. And again, the rational brain takes a little bit of time to catch up with the emotional brain. My really good friend Andrea and I were backpacking in the Mount Rainier area. She was a few steps ahead of me, and she came around this really big boulder in the trail. And all of a sudden, less than 10 feet away from her, she found herself face to face with, can you guess? A bear. Because apparently we have them here in the Pacific Northwest. They looked at each other. She regarded this bear, and she thought in the deepest part of her being, this is a kind bear. It's a good bear. It's a bear that means me no harm. And as she's beginning to have this love relationship with this bear that's less than 10 feet away, our friends who were hiking with us, who were further on down the trail, were growing concerned because they could see this whole thing going on. And they started yelling, bear, bear. And Andrea interpreted their voices as fear. And that's all it took for her emotional brain to kick in, and she started to run away. Now, I hadn't even seen the bear yet. So she leaves the trail. I see this bear, and my first thought is, oh, look, it's a bear. And then my second thought is, she's running away in fear, and my emotional brain took off with me, and I started chasing after her, which of course makes me bear bait because I'm in the back. The bear was a kind bear. It ran off the trail on the other side, probably because we scared it half to death. Andrea and I both know that you don't run away from a bear. You can set in their predator instinct. By the way, this was the bear. And you can set in the predator instinct. You're supposed to stand your ground, face the bear calmly as you can, and talk to it. And at the very most, you back away slowly, but you don't run. Our emotional brains just ran away with us. Fear, my friends, is so contagious. Now, what if we had less fear in this world? What if we had no fear in this world? The people that I mentioned at the very beginning who have had the fear processing center in their brain damaged, if the rest of their brain is functioning like it should, they can feel every single emotion that there is on the emotional spectrum, but they can't feel fear. And as a result, for the most part, they believe that the world wishes them well. Now, can you imagine what that would be like to wake up every day and to think, oh, the world wishes me well? I think this would be a different planet. For one thing, there'd be a lot less reason for war. People, situations, economies would all be less threatening. There'd be less need to be aggressive or defensive. Neighbors could talk out their differences over a beer instead of sabotaging backyard renovation plans. Or students, you could actually help each other study instead of fearing for the grade curve and your chances of getting into grad school. Intrepid travelers could see the world. And all of us would be better able to share with friends and strangers and neighbors who are in need. Now, I'm not suggesting that we get rid of the fight or flight system. We really need that. What I am suggesting is ratcheting down our overall level of fear of things that keep us smaller than we should be, or less generous, or less courageous, or less kind. Now, every single person on this planet is gloriously unique. And that means that there's no one single way to make fear less fearful. But that also means that there's a lot of ways to try. And one of the ways that's been really helpful for me is trying to look at my fear a little bit more objectively. So when I consider my Australian hiker friends' fear of bears, to me, it looks a little bit unfounded. First of all, they've never even seen a bear in the wild, and it keeps them from here. Now, I can take that objectivity and try and turn it around and look at my own fears. Fear of spiders, my fear of rejection, my fear of crustaceans. I know, that one's a little weird. And I can realize these are a little bit unfounded as well. And they oftentimes look even more unfounded when I hold them up to a reality check. On average, in the United States, spider bites kill 4 people a year, 4. Bear attacks account for less than 3 deaths a year. And that's in the US and in Canada, and that's black bears and grizzly bears. Less than 3. FBI statistics show us that violent crime has reduced by half in this country since 1993. So our fears come from very reasonable places, but so often the level of our fear just doesn't match up with the level of danger out there. Jason Cumley is a guy who was terrified of rejection. He would hole up in his apartment when he wasn't working, and one day he realized, he had this epiphany, that he was terrified of rejection. And he decided right then and there, he made this unusual decision, that he was going to face his fear, and he was going to seek out and receive at least one rejection every single day. So he would ask a stranger for a ride or for a piece of gum or to cut in line at the store, and he found that it was actually harder to get a rejection than he had thought. Now, his fear came from a real place, but it didn't match the actual threat that this rejection fear had on him. Now, his rejection therapy is desensitization on steroids. It is really on steroids. Now, desensitization is also called exposure therapy. Exposure therapy exposes a person to a little bit of what they're afraid of until that fear is managed, and then you increase the exposure level until you get to the full-blown fear and it no longer has as much power over you. You can manage that fear. I used to be terrified, deathly afraid of public speaking until my first graduate program, when I was required to teach a couple classes a semester in order to get a scholarship to pay for school. There was nothing like some financial need for some exposure therapy. And for the most part, it worked. I have my fear of public speaking is mostly desensitized because I have opportunities to do it regularly. Now that, I gotta say, this one raised up that exposure level just a hair. Thanks for being nice. Another way to be able to reduce fear is through talk therapy. Talk therapy allows a person to get underneath their fears, kind of why they have them, where they came from, develop some language around them, what are the triggers for it, and hopefully to process through what those fears are. Talk therapy has been tremendously helpful for me. But for some people, talk therapy isn't quite enough because while it can really deal well with your thought processes, it doesn't necessarily deal with your body. And your body is hugely important because it's here that we feel and we experience all of that fear. Fear is literally imprinted in our bodies because of those really important but pesky stress hormones, right? So those stress hormones need to be dissipated somehow. So it's really important to focus on the body in order for long-term fear reduction. And there's 3 great ways to be able to do this. Through breathing, through mindfulness, and through yoga. And bears have even been known to engage in these activities. Because let's face it, humans are terrifying. Psychiatrist Kurt Thompson recommends breathing exercises to retrain our brain. So on average, adults breathe 12 times a minute. He recommends slowing that down to about 6 times a minute and practicing this slower breathing a couple times a day for about 10 to 15 minutes at a time. Because remember, it's our emotional brain that regulates our breathing. So if we force ourselves to slow down our breathing, then we can allow our rational brain to take more control. And slower breathing has also been shown to more quickly dissipate those stress hormones running through us. So if we regularly practice slower breathing, we can train our rational brain to take more control, and we can recover more quickly from a frightened emotional brain and its physiological effects. Now, in theory, we can place these skills into practice when we really need them, like running into a bear on the trail. So it's a really, really great thing to practice some slow breathing. And controlled breathing is also a part of mindfulness. So often our fears are of something that's out there, like fear of a relationship breaking up, or fear of getting a terrible illness, or fear of losing your job. It's these things that are out there. And mindfulness is a practice that allows us to take all of these fears and to be aware of them, but to stay present right now, in the here and now, real time, in the present moment. All you have to do is ask yourself the simple question, what am I feeling right now? What is the state of my being right now? And it allows us to get grounded in the goodness of being alive, and it allows us to attentively consider our emotions and to experience them with objective openness rather than the often typical judgmental criticism. Mindfulness has also been shown to decrease the hyperactivity of the brain's danger detection system, so it can make us calmer overall. And mindfulness has been shown to increase the rational thinking capacities of the brain as well. Now, yoga is unbelievably cool because It has both components of breathing regulation and mindfulness. It's awesome. Yoga can get us in touch with our physicality. It can allow us to learn how we inhabit our body, and it can really teach us the connections between our own emotions and our bodies. Yoga is fantastic. Neuroscientist and psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk has done some research and found that yoga has been a phenomenal therapy treatment for people who are trying to recover from extremely significant trauma in their past. More effective is yoga for trauma patients than even any drug therapy. It's fantastic. Now, there is no one way to be able to reduce your fear, but there are certainly a lot of ways to try. And I'd ask you, what is your fear? What is it that you're afraid of? Is it phobic stuff like spiders and clowns and public speaking and crustaceans? Or is it things like failure or rejection, or fearing people who are different from yourself, or fearing revealing your authentic self? What is it that you're afraid of? And what kind of freedom might you be able to experience if your fear were reduced, even just a little bit? And how much more beneficial could your life be to others if you experienced less fear? How much change could this campus see if there were less fear? Or if there were less fear in Bellingham, or in our political system, or in the media? I firmly believe that one of the best ways that we can positively impact our own lives and our communities and the entire world is by experiencing and harboring less fear. What is it that you fear? And how will you stand and face that bear? Thank you.